my name is Mingus, and welcome back to the UGN channel, or whatever it's called these days. So, it's been a good minute since the last time I've done anything like this, and if you can guess from the title, this won't be a regular thing, but this is something I've wanted to do for a long time now. Now for clarification, this isn't the UGN returning or anything like that. Valor is still up and active, and is actually doing a lot better structure than we ever did back then, and is still being led by Griffin with a bunch of OG UGN members who are still around today. This isn't going to be a video talking about Valor though. Unfortunately, I've not really been active in the community since 2017, and I seem to have missed a hell of a lot since then, so I'm going to be focusing more on the years 2011 to 2017 with a brief overview of the years after. But as I said, not being there kind of prevents me from painting an accurate picture, and this is less about the actual clan and more about the people that the video is actually for. So this is going to serve as a retrospect of our last 10 years in the clan community. Yep, I just said that out loud. So I've taken the liberty of adding some timestamps to the video just in case you guys don't feel like sitting for an 8-minute intro of me rambling, but if your name's Grip, there's a timestamp in the video just for you. I wasn't entirely sure how to structure this. I ran into a bit of a nightmare when I realised how much history there actually was, as well as how much history had been lost too. It's not been an easy task trying to recontextualise documents and screenshots in the last decade, and a few weeks into this I found myself wondering if people would even care about a video like this. This is such a niche community, and the amount of traceable UGN members has definitely dwindled over the years. These videos are mainly for those UGN members, but I've tried to structure this in a way that should be relatively digestible for people in the community. But if you have no idea what I'm talking about, you may as well leave now. This isn't exactly going to make it any easier for you. That being said, this isn't going to be a direct timeline of events, more of an overview of the different eras and iterations with some significant events. I've tried to make this as accurate as possible, but no one's exactly paying me for this, so you'll have to excuse any mistakes. So the current plan is to split this into 5 parts, with this being part 1, the introduction, part 2 being the Reach era, part 3 being the Discord era, and parts 4 and 5 serving more as like an epilogue with some interviews and testimonials thrown in there. You might be wondering why, out of the blue, I've decided to do something like this, and truth be told, I'm not entirely sure either. I'm thinking that 343 sunsetting the servers for the OG Halo games definitely factors into it. Knowing that the original versions of the games we grew up on and had all those memories on will no longer be playable online, with a lot of the additional features such as the whole screenshots of view section on Reach, with growing concerns that theatre clips will no longer be accessible. These have all been big incentives to get started on a project like this, and not only that, but already so many of the memories, clips and videos have been lost forever. I've managed to back up a lot of my old theatre videos, and in doing so I've regained a lot of memories, but this only really makes me think of how much has actually been lost. I mean, we're entering an age where the old is finally being ushered out, and if we don't act quickly enough, a lot more will be lost. I already missed the opportunity to port all of my old clips and maps when 343 gave the chance. I don't even know what I was doing at the time, but for some reason the news of it failed to come to my attention. Well, here I am having to navigate my old 360, which I don't exactly remember ever being this slow and crashy, but if this has taught me anything, is if there's ever been a time to make sure everything is archived, it's either now or more realistically about a year ago. Another major factor for me is where I'm currently at of my own life. It's no secret I always struggled to maintain a solid commitment to any ongoing project I ever set up, whether it's UGN Central, which was definitely a bi-weekly series. UGN Central will continue, but not as a bi-weekly series anymore, but as a tri-weekly series instead. Or let's not forget UGN Weekly, or just about any other machinima series I ever tried to make or clan I tried to run. It took me a very long time to realise something very fundamental about why I kept coming back, and more importantly why I kept leaving. And this was the very fact that it was never the clans that kept my attention. They worked as an amazing catalyst for some excellent memories to be had, but to be honest with you, it was only ever really the people that kept me around. The idea of starting a clan was always exciting, but by the time we got to the second generation of UGN, it became more of an idea of starting the clan to us. As 14 to 16 year olds, having what we had perceived as great experiences and running what we saw as a successful war machine at such a young age, the very idea of getting to restart the UGN became something that would really get the wheels moving with us. And with the group we had, and the group we still have now, it was very easy to get entranced by the very idea of doing this. But again, to me, the idea of the UGN never really had anything to do with the clan we were running, but more the core group of people that we were running it with. That really is the point of this project. That, and to have a little time capsule for the people who care enough to look back on. It's likely that the original UGN videos won't always be public. I mean, look at this shit. I'd like to think eventually I'd have all of them unlisted but available on a Discord server or something, but I won't be privating them anytime soon though, not to worry. So, for any of you who really have no idea what I'm talking about, in 2014 we made a clan called the United Golden Nation, a name that sounded a hell of a lot better back then. So, this is essentially a military-based clan, and I want to say it's not as bad as it sounds, but you can see the straight lines and convoys and the whole roleplay element that's clearly there. But in our defense, the main thing we really did back then was raids, and that's really all it boiled down to. You don't need me to explain what these are if you've made it this far into the video, but the main thing is how long these raids would last. I mean, 6 hours or so was a pretty good standard, with some lasting literal fucking days. I'm not making it sound very appealing, but you can imagine how much free time we all had back then. The fact that you would sometimes be literally the last man in the game waiting it out for hours until the enemy team would either give up or end the game, or someone brings up something about raid rules. But, you know, to me and to us, these were really the main attraction. But you've obviously got the training sessions, which came in all different forms, and the other different clan battle types with things like team tac and, well, I guess actual clan battles. Though these required actual skill, so I don't really know much about all that. But we did this for literal years, and hell, Michael and Welsh are still doing this. And I guess that's a good point to come to. Literally, it is just those two from our core group who are still doing this. And, you know, just to be clear, nothing against them or anyone who's actually active still. I know it's coming across that I'm really hating on all of this, but it's really more of a case of just the rest of us having to focus on different things. At least for me, where whenever I found myself putting the majority of my time into clans, many other aspects of my life got neglected. This definitely isn't necessarily the same for anyone else. A lot of it's just down to not having the time anymore. I mean, a lot of us are at college or uni, or, I mean, Jesus, Grip's starting an actual family now. We're definitely not kids anymore, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but ultimately what would be terrible is to let all of this history be forgotten, and for it to still be portrayed like this.
The 1st UGN Army Battalion, as well as the 2nd UGN Army Battalion. This was done mainly for training purposes, so that members could train together and fight together, and with the introduction
So it really was 10 years ago all this shit began. I was just going to start this from just the NHR, but I wouldn't really be doing the memory of all those clans justice if I didn't begin this where it really began. At least for me anyway. So it was June 2011, my first year on Xbox, and my two mates who lived across from me got me to start a Halo clan with them. But in the end, as you can imagine, we ended up having very different ideas for how these clans should be. And when I came across the UN's videos for the first time, this idea of what a clan should be would never really be the same again for me. Clan videos clearly left a pretty big impression on me. I mean, somehow nothing really was the same after that, and as an 11-year-old me at the time was already making videos, it kind of seemed like a given that I would have to make some form of clan video as well. I mean, honestly, look at this shit. This was actually the standard clan video you would see back then, and it was terrible. Granted, you did have some standouts which would eventually set the standard for how clan videos should be, but even the UN's channel indulged in its fair share of slideshows. Thankfully, this format got memed very quickly though and dwindled out over the years, and my days of grabbing Bungie.net screenshots would soon come to an end. And that's actually a good segue to the next point, with the changeover of Halo from Bungie to 343, which was a very big deal back then. I don't think anyone could have really predicted what could have happened, but at this stage I'm sure people were just excited to get their hands on Halo 4, but I'm sure even at this stage there was a level of apprehension, but I'm going off topic here. The clan community was at a medieval Stone Age era, and I'm sure someone could describe it better than me, but the community version of Discord only really existed in the channel comments of people's YouTube channels, like JB's and others I'm sure I wasn't aware of at the time. You still had clans knocking around like V100 and the Advent, which would eventually merge into FleetCon, as well as DoD, the Emperor's Finest, and Clan Troops was an excellent source of news in the community. The UUF would have been called the United Union Clan at this point, and a hell of a lot more stuff that I'm probably not going to mention. This isn't a video on the clan community, but I do find it important to set the scene here. It says something to me that we had such an active community, yet all people were talking about back then was how the community was dying. 10 years later, that argument is still being made, and if Halo Infinite is sustainable for clans, I very much expect that argument will still be going on in another 10 years. And what's funny to me is I was literally saying what I'm saying now, along with all this other autistic shit 10 years ago too.
Well, it's not dying. I mean, like, how can the community die? I mean, if it's still got people in it, and if it's still got people having fun in it, then it's not dying.
Yeah, I somehow sound more English here than I do now. 2012, the Golden Age. This would be the year it all really began. So, at some point mid-2012, the Liberty Knights were created, or whatever they were called at the time. There's a few disputing reports, but currently for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to suggest that the Liberty Knights came first. The new Halo Republic, also known as just NHR, would be the mid-ground clan that would also be the most recognisable when looking back, with a handful of other iterations in the mix too. Everyone I've spoken to don't really remember their origins beginning on Reach though, which definitely shifts the timeline I had in my head around. So if I'm doing this chronologically, then I'll continue my own story for this year, as the NHR story really kicks off post Halo 4. So 2012 was really the genesis for all of this. Sure, I did start the year before, but you gotta understand that was my first year on Xbox, let alone experiencing a clan community of any form. So in this year, things really took form, and the community at the time was the most active I'd seen it be for years. For me, it was the prime of my childhood years, as Reach was still relatively fresh and we hadn't left it and returned a million times before. This would be the last year I'd attempt to actually lead a proper clan of my own, with all of my attempts consisting of other 12-year-olds who also had no idea what they were doing, but there was a fun naivety about it all though. This would also be the year my dive into media would begin, with clan media starting to explode everywhere. Granted, these would just be Windows Movie Maker videos until the next year, but I look back at that year with a lot of fondness. I brought this ridiculous capture card that couldn't even record colour, and yet people would still ask me to record footage for them. So all of my clan attempts would eventually fall through. It was actually Delta Command I was leading, with a notable figure, Darkness Echo, at my council. He was known as XX Activate XX back then. And in some way or another, we'd both end up in a version of the UUF led by Zektorn at the time, and eventually Strike would come back, but at this point the clan lost my attention and I'd eventually focus on different things for a little while. It was all fun back then. Granted, they definitely took it a lot more seriously than they should have. Not that this ever went away, but I didn't really think about it like that at the time. Hell, crouch laps were a regularly enforced thing. It's crazy to think people actually did this shit, and yes, unfortunately, I am people. So, back to what Michael and the others were doing. So Halo 4 must have just been released, with Forge 2 no less, so clan activities could actually begin from launch. Seems like a strange idea these days. I don't actually have a lot of info on the group from this era though. As you can imagine, I wasn't there yet, but what I do have is that the NHR name was inspired by the NCR from Fallout. I'm sure there was a discussion between Pink, Michael and the others where this took place. Though they did eventually go by the name NCR2, with a funny story where a rebellion took form and formed their own clan going by that name, with a funny turn of events where the person who made and posted all of their recruitment pictures actually ended up rejoining. But somehow they figured that they would just rename themselves to NCR so they could catch all of the new recruits that the rebellion might get. It's genius. So, Halo 4 wasn't what everyone wanted it to be. This isn't going to be a review, but it's hard to talk about the clan community without discussing the impacts and implications that the 343 era games would have. Talks of the community dying wouldn't be well combated by the games releasing in questionable states or just having issues that would make clans a hell of a lot more less sustainable. There was a lot of hype for Halo 4, and this was reflected in the community at the time. You can sort of imagine the effect it would have had in the long run. As said though, 2012 was an interesting year, with UUF being a very active clan from my memory, with other clans like CCM and Unicom who were still around. You even had Terrible Austin running his antics, and apparently there's even evidence to suggest that SOH began here, along with the Blood Angels as well as the UNR. This would also be the year that V100 would end and JB would make his official retirement for the next half a decade. Twenty 2013 was very much for me a turning point. It was still fresh out of the early 2010s era, but a lot of the aesthetic of that year definitely bled into the later years, though this is about clans. So as mentioned, the release of Halo 4 caused a lot of problems within the community. It was simple things like the entire elite community just being wiped out with no playable elites, the game straight up just looking ugly, and ultimately the Forge canvases being tiny. It didn't feel like the step up everyone was expecting. You look at the jump between Halo 3 and Reach, and then going from Reach to 4 feels like a sidestep going backwards, if that even makes sense. But nevertheless though, this is the year things started to get moving. It wouldn't be the year UGN is formed, but if they would have called NHR UGN instead, it easily would have qualified, because there were literally 7 Golden Boys there at the time, with evidence to suggest that some of them were around just as Halo 4 launched, which is pretty crazy to me. But in terms of who we had in 2013, we had John/Pink, who played the second in command role, Recrisis, who was very much a military leader, with Mech, our main forger, Grip, who's, well, Grip, and Rogan Sigma, who I couldn't not include, and a bunch of others who stayed with us for a very long time. It's uncertain who joined first, but from what I can see it started off with Michael and Pink. One by one more people were gathered, either by recruitment pitches, which was the main way to get people at the time. There was also mass messaging, which was also quite effective, or just by coming across people by chance, like Grip for example, who began in the UNR and was actually brought in to be one of the more serious people, if you can believe that. And soon after, Mech would apparently be recruited through one of those recruitment pitches I mentioned. There could be some argument that this happened at the very end of 2012, but due to some mixed reports and for the sake of introducing everyone from this era at the same time, it made more sense to do it here. So it became a familiar story. Something would happen to the clan, and whether it was internal or external, activity would be affected, and the best possible solution, as always, was to rebrand. The first recorded time of this happening would be during the last raid the Liberty Knights would have, where a rebellion that had been thought of about 2 hours before, not even for any particular reason from all accounts, but to set the scene, you had 2 people guarding the front gate, and apparently they just let people just run straight into the base while faking reactions about trying to stop them and about how they're being overrun. Obviously Michael just was watching them with a sniper, and as it happened he sniped the 2 immediately, and I presume some form of party kicking took place. This was a pretty pointless rebellion though, as far as I can tell, and only really happened for shits and giggles, but this did cause the birth of the new Halo Republic, as well as Michael's new gamertag NHR Darkblade. Me and a bunch of UUF people that I left with were just hopping around on Minecraft, and I guess we spent way too long talking with each other because we eventually started a clan called the Revolution, led by Rev Snowy, who was known as the Mighty Snowy back then, as well as myself, Sentry Delta, and our old friend Sentry Nova. This generation was pretty inconsequential, but without it, there's a good chance I never would have met the Golden Boys, and in all fairness, we had a lot of fun doing what we were doing. We wanted to operate outside of the community to avoid all the toxicity and all the negativity, but as you can imagine, this didn't really last long. Revolution's first gen would last from the 1st of February 2013 to the 1st of April of the same year. Thankfully, there's no video evidence of this 2013 version, and it's definitely for the best. This would have been my last year of my movie maker attempts before I got on Elgato, and trust me, those days were not good. This would be the year I got my capture card, and well, needless to say, Windows Movie Maker was never touched again, and it was time for Generation 2 of the Revolution. Somehow the website still exists with all the little news updates that we put on there. We weren't really a big deal or anything, but we had a funny run-in with the 99th Regiment for the first time, where Dre, without realising I had a capture card, really shot himself in the foot. I've lost the video now, but it was amazing. I'm presuming I took it down eventually because it was honestly just a violation, but we made up in the end and he was actually pretty cool about it. But this would have been my first successful clan that would have had relatively consistent activity, and some interesting structure ideas too. It didn't last long, but it was fun, and Snowy and I still talk today. So as clans do, we'd have our conflicts. I briefly remember a clash with Joe Winner 1, but again it was never really anything consequential, but I'm sure he even ended up joining the UGN in the end, so he's all good. Backtracking to the 99th Regiment, it would actually be in this mini conflict that I'd find myself in a raid that was initially just between the Revolution and the 99th, but somehow all these other people found themselves getting into the game. Once they had a significant amount of people in the game, they ended up actually being the dominant force, even turning on us at one point after a pseudo-alliance. This would be a very long raid for us at the time, but eventually I'd establish a private chat with their leader, and the game would end on a tie at all accounts. I was fairly certain at the time that this was some iteration of the UUF due to their emblem and colours, but I'd later find out that this was not the case. Running parallel with this story, you also have the NHR having some iterations of its own, being in the form of the Rangers and their illegitimate version of Central Command. The order all of this happened is a bit of a mess, and I don't intend on figuring it out, but the ones mentioned did have significance, with the NHR marking the return to Reach, Central Command being their UNSC experiment, and the Rangers, which is described as their first move to clan politics. This was roughly in February of 2014, where Michael was invited to a community summit by Icelayer, who was leading the League of Nations at the time. This is where DGA True thought It Michelle would manage to incite some joint community conflict against themselves, where the Rangers along with SOH fighting against them on their own map, I believe. This would be an ongoing conflict, with LN doing scheduled battles while the Rangers would be assaulting their training sessions and other open lobbies while doing joint raids with other clans against them. It's said here that DGA was destroyed in this conflict, but I don't have all the details. But ultimately, this initial community involved conflict caused the leaders of the Rangers to want something more. So much so that the Vice President Orange Puma would go on to create a clan of his own known as ASG. So this left the clan in a strange state. As you can imagine, the usual solution to something like this would be to rebrand and start something new. I'm sure you can tell where this is going. One thing led to another, and the core Golden Boys found themselves in a lobby of the United Nations execution map, discussing the very idea of creating a nation themselves. And you're gonna love this, the name was literally said, one word at a time, by 3 different people. No joke. Somebody said United, another said Golden, and then someone said Nation. Yeah, that's how it really began. So, backtracking. That clan I mentioned earlier, who I thought was the UUF, I'm sure you probably pieced together by now that this was actually the UGN. And that would be how I found myself meeting those guys for the first time. There's a hell of a lot more to that story. Maybe I'll go back and do a director's cut when I realise how much I've left out, but obviously I won't be going any further from here. All of that's for these next parts, which will be coming soon. So for some closing thoughts, ultimately it's been surreal going through all of this and relearning everything. If you guys have the opportunity to do anything like this, I couldn't recommend it more. There's something about the nostalgia of clans that's unlike a lot of things, especially those early days when you really had no clue what you were doing and you were literally a 2011 kid or whichever year you came from. Though one thing, I think it's important to remember that it's very easy to overlook how good things are currently when you're comparing things to the golden age. Though from the looks of things, there's been several golden ages since then. We're just getting old. This has been fun, and if you've somehow made it this far, I hope you enjoyed. If I got anything wrong or missed anything, feel free to let me know, but until then, I've got a lot of shit to do, so in a bit.